Brilliant. Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to wait just one more minute, just for any last people who are coming in. But thanks, everyone, for joining us. And then we'll get started in a moment. I don't want to take up too much of your time hanging around. It's really great to see so many people joining promptly. So welcome and thank you. So just as the last people are joining us, let's get started and we will hear a bit more about you. And have lots to share with you too. So welcome to this Alive Learning Forum session. We're celebrating our first birthday, and it's great to have an amazing panel and some updates for you as well. So thank you so much. If you can take us to the next slide, please. And this is your opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself. We want to know where in the world you're joining us from. So if you have a chance, do use the Mentimeter. It's in the chat, and Cristian is displaying the results for us. So as you get going, we'll begin to see some results popping up. I'm seeing people join there. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from today, maybe this morning for some of you as well. I'm opening it up myself so I can test it. So hopefully we're beginning to see some words. Oh, now they're coming in fast. Curiosity and learning, that's a great words for a session like today's. Just waiting for a few more because I can see we have more people connected than have hit submit yet. Really like the connections and the contributions as well. So we're hoping to have a really good discussion today. So as we're collecting responses on this question, I wonder if we should move to the next one, Cristian. I think you can set it up for us. So this is your chance to put a pin in the map. Tell us where in the world you're joining us from today. See if it works. There you go. So I'm joining you from Johannesburg, but I know we have people from all over the world, so I'd love to see where you're joining us from. Some in the UK, North America, Ethiopia, Uganda. It's testing my geography now, but it's lovely to see these dots popping up, see people from all over the world responding, and there's a few more coming in as we go. Okay. Well, thank you very much to those of you who've responded. Oh, just as I was going to move on, I'm seeing more coming in. Let's go back to the slides if that's okay. And we will continue with our session. Many of you know me already, but just to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Ruth Stewart. I'm joining you from the bottom end of Africa and based in Johannesburg. I've spent most of the last 25 years trying to think about how to drive impact through evidence-informed decision making in academia and in various other roles. And many of you all know me because I led the Africa Evidence Network for a long time. I'm now working as the Director of Alive, and I'm your chair for today. If I can have the next slide, please. So here's our agenda. We'll have a brief presentation from Cristian in a moment about some of the highlights of the first year of this forum, and then we're going to move to a panel discussion. And we've got some news for you before we close. So we're going to have the next slide. Just a little bit of admin. Please help us make the session a success. Keep your microphones off until you're invited to unmute. We're recording the session and we'll share it online. And you've been added to our mailing list, so I hope you'll be able to join us for future events. You're welcome to unsubscribe if you get too many of those invitations. And if you've got any queries about these sessions or any of our work, please do contact our team using the email there. If I can have the next slide. We also have live translation available. So you can click on the Worldly link to open the window, which is on the top right corner of your screen. And you can read the translation while you're still seeing the meeting by just scrolling that slightly over to the side. We hope that that will help your participation if English isn't your first language. And if I can have the next slide. Great. So I get to introduce some amazing people. We have a fantastic panel today, some of my very favorite people. And I was thinking about how to introduce this great group of people, and I was thinking of an amazing collection of people who are committed to trying to make a difference using evidence, really bringing experience from all over the world. So it's great to have Cristian Mansilla here with us, joining from Canada. And he's going to be sharing a little bit more about the work of this forum. Frederick Dejonghe is based in Brazil and is not at the carnival to come and join us for this very serious discussion. So thank you, Fred. If I can have the next slide. Firmaye Bogale is a public health researcher in Ethiopia, someone who I've been admiring and connecting with for many years now, and some really exciting work happening on the continent. So great to have you with us, Firmaye. Racha fadlallah is based in Beirut and has always been someone who brings a different perspective from a different context whilst working on a shared passion around making sure that evidence makes a difference. So it's great to have you with us, Racha. If I can have the next slide. Dabiela Garcia Villamil, and I'm probably pronouncing your name wrongly there, Dabiela, so apologies, has been one of our co-chairs along with the rest of our panelists over the last year. She's from Colombia, but I think joining us from Finland today. So it's great to have you with us, Dabiela. And last but not least, Josephine Watera is a colleague and I was going to say friend, Josephine, I think it's the best way to describe you, working on this space of evidence from such a different angle from within the Parliament of Uganda. And we really appreciate that you're joining us today as well, Josephine. So thank you. So just before I pass across to Cristian to tell you a little bit more about the forum and the work over the last year, I just wanted to introduce this idea of living evidence as a methodology, but also as something that can help us to make a difference in the world. So really my work over the last few years has been focusing on how do we connect the decision makers who need evidence and living evidence that can meet those needs if we can get this right. And if you don't mind just doing one click for me. Sorry, I animated a slide and I don't have control, but thank you. So really we're working on these connections. We're working on how do we facilitate these purple arrows to ensure that the priorities of decision makers are what feed into the generation of evidence and that in turn answers people's questions. If you could just do one more click for me. We've been thinking about these characteristics of this kind of living evidence that can have an impact, this system, that it needs to be collaborative and useful and dynamic and efficient and always be driven by principles that are fair, about equity as well. So if I could have the next click, really, I wanted to just share with you some of the successes of the work of Alive over the last year. And this comes with both an acknowledgement that Alive is still very young and that we're learning all the time. And huge thanks to this forum, this learning forum and the wider evidence community who've been guiding our work, because this is where we get to share what we're learning and learn from others as well. And Cristian's going to be saying a little bit more about how the forum's played a role in that over the last year. When I think about the successes of Alive, just really some high-level bullet points of the work we've been doing. So we've been thinking about how we can drive equity, and in recent meeting, reflecting on how we've perhaps just started to move the curve a little bit, move the dial a little bit on this aspect. We were noting how we're facilitating inclusion in our partnerships of people who have previously been excluded from these decision-making forums and giving them a voice in shaping the evidence that can then meet their needs. And then in a very practical sense, we've been working whenever we can have an influence to direct funding for living synthesis to partners in low resource settings. In terms of collaboration and collaborative working, we are currently facilitating 7 evidence partnerships. And when I asked my colleagues who are really deep in these relationships, they shared with me that we're now working with over 200 individuals in 100 organizations across 20 countries. So we've been making some headway in building these collaborative relationships. And I'm sure that that is what will drive change in all of our work, really. It's those relationships that make a difference. If I could have the next slide, please. And then just a few other reflections on how our work has been progressing. So we've been supporting organizations to think about living synthesis methodologies. And we aren't yet, but we envisage beginning to see the efficiency benefits of living evidence, of having an evidence base that's responsive, that we can keep tapping into. So it's still something we're learning about very much. And similarly on the useful front, so we know that we've facilitated a process in which decision makers' needs are defining evidence, driving the production of 2 large living evidence maps, particularly in vaccines, but also in climate and health. And then the decision makers are starting to shape the protocols for the living synthesis that we'll be following, but we don't yet know whether that's being used for decisions. That's really what we're all working towards, and we hope will start to come to fruition soon. So thank you so much for indulging me while I talked a little bit about Alive's work. I'm going to pass to Cristian, who's going to say a little bit more about the forum and what the forum's been doing over the last year. Over to you, Cristian.
Thank you, Ruth. I think this is like a pleasure to me to be here. Like I'm always just like trying to be like behind the scenes, and it's just like it's great to kind of like be presenting like the work that we have been doing like over this year, like in the Alive Learning Forum. So this initiative like that we're all in right now is just like an instrumental part of like a life mission at the end, like of kind of like sharing and learning from others what we're doing in general, right? So we are trying to kind of like build like a global exchange for like the know-how about living evidence around the world. And this is supposed to be like an open access network in which we'll just like share innovation, best cases, and what we are learning to strengthen living evidence partnerships in general. And what we try to do is to support like through multilingual and live translated sessions that you could just like always like watch the recording or participate in each one of those to make like a more timely, effective, and affordable approaches to evidence production and use at the end, right? And this is like a brief disclaimer. I think most of you are probably very savvy on on the concept of living evidence, but when we speak about that, we understand like an evidence base that is continuously updated as new evidence become available, or as any of the kind of like decision makers or like evidence use needs are evolving over time, right? And then we're gonna show like a something very quick that is very that it could be really complex, but I'm trying to summarize that like very briefly in 2 slides, right? To give like the bulk of the time for the panel on this session. So this is like work that we did like for analyzing all transcript or records of the 2025 sessions of the Alive Learning Forum, and we did a qualitative analysis to include those plus the post results and the session slides on each one of those. And this is a work that was like coordinated by the Alive staff, but it was also kind of like supported and co-led by the co-chairs of this initiative that will be in this session, the panelists, right? So you'll have like the chance to kind of like talk to them as well. And we try to organize the main themes coming from this qualitative analysis in 2 main groups. One is just like what people or what is the role that the Alive Learning Forum could serve, right? And we call that learning functions. And then secondly, what are we learning from the Alive Learning Forum sessions? And we call those the learning insights, right? And after that, we try to build this diagram in which we show at the left all the learning functions, which are essentially four, right? So we see that like the allied learning firm could play a role in in encouraging equity, diversity and inclusion in the sessions, in collecting and sharing best practices about living evidence, in also kind of like fostering collaboration and partnership building across all different people in the evidence ecosystem, and also kind of like building common knowledge about living evidence in which like we are all kind of like coming in a path that we're all going together, right? So after those like kind of like emerging learning functions, we have these emerging learning insights like from this analysis that we structure them in the five main characteristics of the allied commitment that like Ruth just like shared a minute ago, right? So I'm gonna give like very quick examples of that. Like so, for example, in the efficiency process, we have technology that could support that like efficiency, but we also have like coordination across different partners to avoid duplication, and how sustainable are living evidence effort over time, right? If we talk about like how useful an evidence base is, we talk about like decision maker needs, but also how trustworthy is at giving evidence base for informing those decisions, right? We have collaboration, and in that part piece, like capacity sharing was a key piece that was shared by all different partners and on different sessions. In FAIR, we have equitable access to evidence, as well as like how like the partnerships are inclusive and fair when delivering evidence outputs at the end, right? And finally, dynamic, which is like like not, I mean, one of the two kind of like key aspects there, which is like not only consider that dynamic, meaning like the living nature of an evidence body could come from the production side, so meaning like updating whenever evidence is available, new evidence is available, but also as policy and practice challenges evolve, we're also kind of like meaning to update those and make it dynamic, that evidence base, right? And yeah, this is my last slide. We just like celebrate like that we are turning 1 year of this amazing space, like in which we'll share like all community-wise, all the different learnings that like Alive is kind of like gaining, but also kind of like a space for many people that like are interested in living evidence to share their experiences and their knowledge to kind of like build a common knowledge base for living evidence, right? So having said that, I'll pass it back to Ruth, who will just like chair the panel of the co-chairs of this initiative that has been instrumental to, and I'm really and deeply thankful for them, right? Because they have been like an instrumental piece of the learning forum in the past year, and they are providing advice and also kind of like a key governance pillars on this initiative. So over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Cristian. And as we start our conversation with the panel, you can use the same Mentimeter in the chat if you want to propose some topics that we should discuss. I'm going to kick us off, and I'm going to suggest in a moment, when you have a chance, Cristian, that you stop sharing and pin our panelists so that we can hear from everyone. And my opening question for you colleagues is really to ask a bit about what motivates you to be working in this evidence space, and specifically, to have got involved with living evidence and with this forum. And I wonder if I can come to you, Firmaye, first to start us off. I'd love to hear what motivates you to work in this space.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ruth. And I want to start by saying that I'm also very happy to be on this call. It's our anniversary and it's been a journey, so congrats to everyone. So, you know, working in evidence to action space is a very interesting space. I don't know if it is a very natural, path for everyone, but it was a sort of an opportunity that came along my path. I didn't think I would be working in this, but I always had this question of, I used to work on research, but you always ask yourself, what am I doing this for? And it is a very unique space, at least for me, that responds to that specific question of what am I doing this for and what is the impact of it? And that is what really got me into the space of evidence to action and evidence informed decision making. But especially these days, I've been working on this for a few years now. what keeps me to work on this space is the fact that I see a day-to-day challenge of the lack of this interconnect that we want to see between evidence and the actions and the policy decisions that are being made. And, especially in a setting like mine, I'm from Ethiopia and I work especially in the health space and social policy space in Ethiopia. And I see that, it's not really a lack of research or evidence really, but it's more of the evidence not being aligned with decision. Maybe it is too late, or maybe it's not in a format that is palatable for decision. And my work really comes in trying to solve this disconnect and really relies in relationship and trust building. And it is where, the Alive Learning Forum really comes in as well. It is really aligned with that motivation and working on relationships. And, over the past year, we've been trying to work beyond just methods and introducing the living evidence method. It is really about providing this platform for connection and partnership and relationship. And I would like to think that we have come some way and we have a lot to go to, but that is what really keeps me motivated and helps me stay in the space. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing for me. I wonder if I can come to you, Daniela, with the same question. I'm curious to know what motivates you working in this space.
Thank you, Ruth, very much. And I actually wanted to start by thanking you for posing that question, because it also helped me really think and understand better, as Firmaye said, like, what am I doing this for, right? Like, it was a really interesting question to build on. And I think that what motivates me to serve as co-chair and to work in this space is actually kind of, I would say, a personal frustration and lessons I've learned working within research groups. So I think that, to give a bit of context, in my work, I've often been very interested in how we as societies organize ourselves and think of the ways we want to live together, both, for example, at a smaller scale, like in communities, and then at a larger global level. And sometimes those systems feel like they have a life of their own, right? Like, but we miss, or it's very hard to see that they're also the result of our individual choices and collective processes. And that raises for me a lot of questions about governance and social and economic development, and about how ideas actually materialize, for example, in national or international law, as well as more in the informal level of social norms that shape our everyday life. So I think in the context of those questions, much of my work has focused on like systematization and synthesis, mostly of qualitative data. And there are two sides of that because I on the one hand, I have this firm belief that this kind of work and research work is very important work. But on the other hand, it sometimes feels like there's a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of resources put in research, and in my case, into social research, that doesn't really talk to itself, or that gets done and it takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and then it's published, and then maybe there's like an outreach event and we talk a little bit about it, and then it essentially disappears, or then it's just like, yeah, it was done, and that's that. So I personally, for example, have been a part of processes where months of participatory research ends up like that, like a report that nobody really knows what to do with it so much. So, or that it is useful to some extent, but that is often quite disconnected from decision making. So I don't think that's a failure of research itself. I think it's more of how we manage research and evidence processes. So when I first heard of the idea of living evidence as a model, it was very interesting to me, because I thought that this is the idea of a model that is alive, that is iterative, that is directly connected to decision making, is precisely what I think has been missing from, well, in social research fields, but also in some of the processes that I've been part of. So I think it makes a lot of sense also that it's so advanced in fields like like health and medicine. But I think many other disciplines could benefit a lot from this kind of approach, and being part of the forum feels like, for me, like a chance to help build that kind of approach beyond the fields where living evidence is already common or is taken like it's stronger. So yeah, that's what motivates me to be part of the forum and to be here today. Thank you,
Great. Thank
Ruth.
you very much for sharing. I'd like to bring Racha into the conversation, if that's okay. And Racha, maybe to ask a little bit more about how in your work you're engaging with living evidence. Whether you have any examples of how maybe it's starting to make an impact, or perhaps shifting the way that you're working. Over to you, Racha.
Thank you, Ruth. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't believe it has been a year since we launched the Alive Forum back in January 2025. So it's great that we are all celebrating our first anniversary, which was a month ago, but yeah. So back to your question, Ruth. So I work at the Knowledge to Policy Center. So basically, our work is fundamentally about knowledge translation, meaning how can we help move evidence into policy and practice in real time. And being based in Lebanon, so we have to work in contexts where decisions are oftentimes sensitive. We have political constraints, and unfortunately, we are shaped by multiple crises, from economic crisis to health-related crisis and humanitarian and wars that also influence the whole evidence to policy cycle. So in those settings, as many of you know, static evidence can quickly become irrelevant or sometimes misleading, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, our first encounter with living evidence was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can also say that the pandemic brought the whole living evidence field to the forefront at the global level as well. Prior to that, and I think Ruth and other colleagues might recall, the field was all about rapid response, rapid reviews, rapid evidence. So we started producing rapid reviews. It was all about speed. We also launched our rapid response unit. So during the COVID-19, we switched to those rapid response mode because our policymakers needed answers in few days. So yes, we were producing evidence at unprecedented speed at that time. But it also became very clear that the evidence it became outdated automatically. It needed to be revisited on a constant basis. So new studies were emerging, assumptions were shifting, and decisions made 1 month needed to be reassessed so that policymakers can make sure whether to continue or discontinue. So what I'm trying to say, the evidence doesn't become wrong in that sense, but it becomes incomplete. And this is where living evidence offered a way for us to remain engaged with decisions as the evidence base continues to evolve. And in fact, at that time, we saw proliferation of living evidence, and we also started leveraging those living evidence to inform policy decisions. And I recall very well the living evidence around face masks. So we did not produce it, but we leveraged it because, as I mentioned, we sit at the interface between research and policy. So we were leveraging that living evidence, and there were like 7 iterations of that living systematic review over the course of the pandemic. So we were using it to inform decisions as the pandemic was unfolding within our rapid response product as well. So we did not explicitly mention it or framed it as a living rapid response, but we did include a living component. So for the first time, we would explicitly state that the evidence and conclusion may change as new data arises and as the crisis unfold and as new realities emerge. So this allowed us to say that this is the best current evidence that we have. This is what we should do now, and here's how it might change in the future rather than presenting the evidence as static. This shift might be subtle for some people, but for us it was powerful because for the first time we were able to explicitly use uncertainty and to explicitly frame update as something that is expected rather than something that is seen as disruptive, that will weaken the evidence base. So this was our first encounter of living evidence, and it really showed us the power and the criticality of living evidence and how it can make KT more honest and more effective, particularly in such fragile, fast-changing context. Of course, recently during the Israeli-Lebanese conflict, the living evidence also became relevant because our policymakers wanted evidence that might change on a daily basis. And I wanted to point that when we talk about living evidence, it doesn't necessarily have to only be living evidence synthesis. So during the war, what was relevant, what became relevant was living data. So they wanted data on casualties, on the number of people who need shelter and number of hospitals that are occupied, etc. So we introduced our crisis chronicle, and within that, we had a section that was updated on a weekly basis, maybe every 4 or 5 days. So certainly, and we can see how living evidence is relevant, particularly in these, if I may say, fragile, rapidly changing context. And I think for us, the challenge is now we know the importance of living evidence, but how can we move it? So I think the discussion in my center now is how can we move from an isolated crisis mode approach to having living evidence integrated as part of the core infrastructure and workflow when it comes to the evidence to policy decisions. So certainly there's no right answer. It's an ongoing learning process that we and other centers are also, we are debating, working, and this is also an ongoing discussion and debate within the Alive Learning Forum as well and our colleagues. So it is a learning process. I will stop here.
That's fantastic, Racha. Thank you so much for sharing those really practical examples of using living evidence. And one of the things you touched on was around kind of partnerships and how we work together to maybe be dipping into the same evidence bases, not necessarily evidence we've generated, but evidence that's available and that we can leverage. And I really appreciated that. It's a really nice segue to bring Fred into the conversation, because I think when I first met you, Fred, you were so passionate about partnerships and relationships and how they work. And I wonder if you might like to come in and say something around kind of how living evidence intersects with those kind of relationships and how that might drive impact.
Great, thank you. Well, I think I can briefly consider an example here. So I'm a bit in the intersection of, on one side, a university and a research center, and on the other side, working with civil society, sometimes as an NGO, sometimes as a UN system. Recently, we've been working on a partnership in the area of food systems. And in particular, we're interested in understanding how these food systems, which are a very important part of Brazilian economy, they can contribute to social cohesion and social development. And at the same time, that while developing itself economically and socially, it doesn't impact our environment with consequences like deforestation or greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the challenge we have. We want to stimulate and develop food systems. We want them to do this in an environmentally sound and responsible way. How did we work with this in terms of partnerships? We decided to establish a steering committee of people who are specialists in their field, but have publicly very different opinions on this topic. Some might be of an industrious background, and they are conservative in the sense that we want to follow the law, but we can't do more than the law because Brazil has so many crises and difficulties already that our bar will be achieving the law. Others might be more progressive, and they believe that the law is their baseline and they can build many innovations above what the law provides. But they share the same system. They transact, they have commercial agreements, they lobby to government in the same way, and they follow the same rules. So this is really a conversation about how we can get these different actors who share a system to common agreements. And living evidence has played a very interesting role in this because we have a year and a half together. And in this year and a half, we've been meeting monthly. And each time we meet, we have to remember what we have of common ground. we know that we are here because different opinions, we have different opinions, and we want to find a shared meaning between us. And living evidence is a really good way to remind us what we know about the system, about what works, about what doesn't work, about what are our biggest impacts environmentally and socially. And a year and a half is a long time. Lots of research is being produced. It wouldn't be useful if we would produce one systematic review at the beginning of the project. And we're really interested in understanding what this group of specialists will bring of common topics. So at the same time that for each encounter, we will bring a short summary of evidence on specific topics being dialogued in this area of food systems. We're also listening to what these specialists are saying, where they're agreeing upon, where they're disagreeing upon, and our evidence is receiving this as an input so that we can know what is most relevant to bring to them to support these conversations, right? So I think that's one example. I could bring a few other ones, but that's one that's been very helpful for us.
That's great. Thank you, Fred. I am just speaking to this panel. I wish we had hours to discuss all of these examples in much detail. It's really great to hear these examples. We have one more panelist who I haven't brought in yet, Josephine. I know you're joining us from Uganda, and it would be lovely to hear from you some reflections because your background is in evaluation. And I know that there can be a challenge with methodologists who bring new methods, the new shiny thing, to decision makers in government and expect you to adopt it and get very excited about it. So I'd love to hear your reflections on living evidence and perhaps how it's conceived amongst your colleagues in the parliament in Uganda. Over to you, Josephine.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm excited that we are talking 1 year because it's a beginning of great things ahead. It's a nice thing to come back and have this reflection. And what, first of all, brings me to this space for me is the desire to do more. And the question that you've raised, that there are a lot of things that are happening, there's a lot of demand and need for evidence. I work in the space of politicians, the Parliament of Uganda, who have been given the mandate by the voters to think and come up with solutions to the community problems. And sometimes some of these things are too swift, and the resources that we are working with are minimal. And so living evidence comes in to give us this opportunity and a platform to say, okay, in terms of rationalization, what should we pull on the table first? Where is the greatest impact that we see coming into this discussion? Who is being left behind? And who is going to be to experience harm when some decisions and steps are being taken in terms of service delivery. So for me and my team, our scope and understanding is that we want the members of parliament to have information when they need the information, but also when they cannot understand that information, that we are available to interpret and package this information in a way that is usable to them, but also help the communities to understand what information informed some of the policies and decisions that they see government undertaking. So we work with research evidence that comes from those scientists that you've been talking about, the high methods from academia, and then we break this down into usable products and give this to members of parliament so that it's a practice kind of evidence. And then we also draw in the voices of the citizen evidence to get to their side of the story, to kind of reflect on what the scientists are saying and what are the actual happenings within the community and how they want to see the policymakers bring influence in that space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine, and welcome to the panel. Colleagues, I wanted to shift us slightly, but before I do that, I'm just opening up to those of you in the audience who joined us today. Please do use the chat if you'd like to ask any specific questions to our panelists, or if you'd like to prompt any turn in direction of the conversation. My question for the panelists, whilst others are thinking about additional topics, was really to look forwards and to think about the role that living evidence might play in the future, in the coming year. How you see maybe the world of evidence shifting and the role of living evidence in those shifts as we look to the future. And I'm opening it up to any of the panelists who'd like to jump in. Please feel free to take the mic. Otherwise, I can invite you in. I saw a hand. Josephine, over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So I see a shift from using a lot of expert knowledge into opening up to listen to the people, so that we get to know what are the issues that are really, realistically hurting them at their level, and coming up with solutions that can actually be reflecting or reflective of what is happening in community. I also see a shift to indigenous knowledge, that we don't just want to come with our big ideas and throw them on people, but also apply that local knowledge or indigenous knowledge on things that have worked at community level, and see how we just make it better, so that it can be something that is replicable and also can be applied in other contexts. I also see that there's a lot of shift to partnerships, that we've worked for a long time with this word of donors, but now as the world has kept moving, there's an understanding or a better appreciation. That's the reason we are transiting towards like development partners, so that we build on partnerships to bring the different kind of knowledge and understanding, but also to balance power relations. So I also see that there's a lot more that is tending towards data, that in the past we've had big gaps that have been seen in the data space, but there's a lot of opportunity now with even the coming in of AI and the innovations and different technologies that are coming in place to expound on this space of making actually data to be living and usable to inform decision making in our spaces. Thank you very much.
Great insights there, Josephine. Thank you. Anyone on the panel want to respond or add to those things? I saw a hand going up. I'm going to come to you, Fred, and then across to Dabiela as well. Oh, you're on mute. So sorry, Fred.
Thank you, Ruth. So I think what I'm really excited to see going ahead is, well, when we're in a space like this, in common, we've heard of living evidence, and we think it's relevant enough to dedicate at least an hour of our week to knowing more about it. Frequently, although, in the places I travel around, when we try and speak of what living evidence is, it can easily sound as something that's very expensive and technically very rigorous. And I think it still frightens people. That's a pity, because the intuition is very strong, as we know that knowledge is frequently huddled up in one place and demands are in another place. So when we understand this intuition, I think we can be creative about how we can connect a certain supply with a certain demand. And I'm really excited actually about the role this learning forum can have in this role specifically, of how can we demystify or simplify what is an important message, but sometimes hidden behind technical codes.
Now I'm on mute. Thank you very much, Fred. Really appreciate that. Dabiela, you had your hand up as well. Do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. I guess what came up for me when thinking about this question is that I think living evidence also has a real opportunity to help tackle misinformation, and also more in like a general society level, not only among decision makers. So I think that if we leave aside for a moment like intentional manipulation, one of the important drivers of misinformation is like the amount of information that we have access to today. So even for people that already want to refer to science, back data, to rigorous analysis, we often receive so much input from so many sources and channels and formats that no single person can realistically put it all together and make sense of it. So I think that that's why also the element of partnerships it's very important in this model, and living evidence can help address that by continuing synthesizing what we already know, what we don't know yet, updating the new information as it comes in, and making that accessible not only to decision makers but also in a more general level to what we call quote unquote the general public, and helping with that. I guess this goes back to my own motivation that I mentioned before, that applying living evidence beyond the fields where they're already well established. So I think that that's something that I would love to see moving forward for this year.
Okay, thank you. How exciting. Racha, Firmaye, I wonder if I can bring you in. Racha, do you want to add? How are you seeing the coming year and the challenges that are ahead for this sector?
Thank you, Ruth. I agree with what my colleagues have said. And so I think one of the biggest opportunity right now for living evidence is the changing expectations. So as we all know, the world around us is shifting. And if I may say, we are at a moment where uncertainty is now unavoidable. So it has become legitimate. It's expected, right? Because of the whole change, geopolitical change, climate change, rapid technological change, all of this has shifted expectation. And for the first time, if I may say, the world is ready for evidence that admits it will need to change. And I believe living evidence is uniquely suited to that reality because it creates permission for us to say, this is what we know now, this is what we're not sure about, this is how we'll adapt. And this is a very different posture from pretending stability in a changing world. Previously, and I know from our experience working at the evidence to policy world, whenever we used to say that we are uncertain about the evidence, it needs to adapt, we need to be cautious, it would be perceived in a pessimistic way as a weakness. Whereas with all that is happening and the changing expectation, living evidence is really uniquely suited for this changing world and changing expectation about how evidence should behave in a world where instability has become the norm. Now, of course, as my colleagues have mentioned, the rise of AI, the availability of more structured coordination like Alive, and shared platforms like the Alive Learning Forum, we can have a real chance to reduce duplications, lower the burden on review teams. So I know from my center, living evidence requires time, resources, and commitment, and you cannot always do it when you are working alone. This is where the importance of platforms like Alive and partnerships like Alive would come so that we can leverage resources, knowledge, tools, and teams towards addressing common questions. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, so how can we move living evidence from associating them with only crisis mode to having living evidence as part and parcel of how we produce evidence, or as part of the evidence ecosystem and the evidence infrastructure. So how can we move them from that isolated products to the infrastructure? And for the Alive Learning Forum, certainly my hope is for us to continue to be an inclusive learning space, to continue to grapple not only with the technical question, but more importantly, those, if I may say, uncomfortable questions about sustainability, governance, power, accountability, incentives that come when we talk about living evidence. And they are really core to the success of living evidence. And sometimes we are shy away from these, but I think we need to confront those questions if we want to elevate the science around living evidence. And so, yeah, I want to conclude with the African proverb that I like. So if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think the Alive Learning Forum is the essence of that proverb. I would like to believe it's that. So thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you, Racha. Thank you both for encouraging us and challenging us at the same time to really engage these difficult questions. I'm going to pass over to Firmaye to see if you wanted to add anything around kind of looking towards the future.
Bonito. Hay 4 lugares, hay más sillas acá.
So sorry, colleagues. I'm just going to ask.
Okay.
Over to you, Firmaye.
Yeah, thank you. It's really hard to be coming in last because they have said everything, and I will be echoing what they have said. But there was a comment, I think in the chat box from Leonel that mentions something about, storytelling and how we can connect this to living evidence. And, for the forum, my hope this year is that we would be able to be more of a bridge, even bigger platform where we would be able to bring in this kinds of conversations into play, and we would be able to explore more spaces, more regions, and bring together different professions and sectors together to think about this in a more of a system lens, where, as all of them have mentioned, where we'll be able to bring in living evidence, not as an isolated exercise here and there, but start thinking about coordinating infrastructure as we go forward. And I think it's going to be not an option anymore. It's going to be a necessity with all the changes that we are seeing. As mentioned, it could be the political infrastructure that we have globally now that is affecting everything, or you could think about the climate change or the AI coming into play. And it is, becoming a necessity to have that conversation. And hopefully, as I mentioned, we would go beyond just talking about the tools and the methods, which is, of course, very important, but also think about, making it a routine system and thinking about partnership as well. So I think there is a huge opportunity. It's just about using it, in the right way and putting in the right lens. And I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Firmaye, and thank you to all our panelists for a really good discussion. I really appreciated different insights literally from all around the world and from a range of experiences, but so many common values and hopes for the way in which living evidence can have an impact into the future. So thank you. I'm going to ask Cristian if he'll pop our slides up, because we wanted to just make a couple of announcements. And while he's doing that, I want to add my congratulations to K2P, the team that Racha's part of, on your 10th anniversary. I look forward to being so grown up and well done. Thank you. So just two initiatives that I wanted to share with you all today before we close this session. And really, this is credits to Cristian's hard work. So thank you, Cristian, for driving these. Alive has been building a living evidence atlas. And this is really tracking living evidence efforts around the world. We've been capturing living repositories and maps and syntheses and guidelines into a searchable online resource. And if you just go through to the next slide for me, Cristian, this is accessible through our website. And this is what it looks like. You'll see that we've identified 227 efforts around the world at the moment, across 28 countries. And you can go in and explore the map and search for different initiatives. So if you just click through to the next slide, this is one of the representations of what this looks like. And we would love to build this together, because it's really a resource for all of us to be thinking about where living evidence efforts are taking place and how we can learn together and collaborate. So please do share initiatives that I'm sure we've missed some. As you know, when you do online searches, you always miss particular parts of the world that perhaps don't have so much of an online presence. So please do get in touch and share your examples so that we can build this together. We'd love to hear more. So thank you, Cristian, for all your hard work on that. And just to move to our second announcement, we're recognizing, and I'm sure you're all experiencing, an interest in AI. And what role it plays and how it can help tackle some of the challenges that we're facing, but also raise some issues as well. So we have committed to having a mini series on living evidence and AI as part of the forum, and probably each quarter to have a special session dedicated to AI and living evidence. And we'll be sharing some more detail as we make some progress. And I love this image here that ChatGPT generated for us. This is what it thinks artificial intelligence and living evidence looks like. We'll see if we can prove it a little wrong, because I'd love to have some more human faces and communities in that image as we go forwards. So thank you so much, Cristian, for that work. I think my last slide is really just to see if there's any queries or questions. Oh, we went straight to the next session, no worries. So my last announcement, that we have a session dedicated to living evidence guidelines coming up in March. And we hope that you'll be able to join us for that session. Now we have a few more minutes to see if there are any queries or questions or contributions from our audience. So I'm going to open up to all of us. Apologies that there's not so much time left, but it's been such a lovely discussion. You're very welcome to put your hand up and join us, or ask a question in the chat if you prefer. I'm seeing some queries coming in. There's a question there for you, Cristian, about, maybe you can reply in the chat, about how people can suggest additions to the atlas. So maybe you can respond for us there, Cristian. And please do use it as well and give us feedback. If it's not useful, we want to make it useful, so we'll make sure we adapt that as we go. Any other queries or questions for the team, or more broadly on those latest announcements that we just made there? Cristian, I wonder if I should pass across to you just for a moment. If there was anything you wanted to add on the atlas in particular, because I know that there's interest in the chat on that.
No, thanks for that. I think it's so I was just responding there, but like yeah, you could email me. I'm just like posting my email there, but or at the end of the Living Evidence Atlas, you will find like a button that it says like get in touch. So you could just like email us, and then we'll just like try to yeah, to accommodate that. Again, this is like an emerging kind of like effort that we'll try to update like monthly. And yeah, so it's like we're hoping to kind of like get on track like in the next few weeks, right? But I think for now it could be like a great venue for everybody that could be interested in living evidence to kind of like see around who's doing something similar, and you could just like filter by many different types of living evidence efforts, and find like different clusters or different people that it's just like around there, right? Again, this is all sort of like public information that you could just like get. It's just like we curated and consolidated in one place. But yeah.
Maybe just to add one thing, reading Leonel's comment about continuously collecting stories, that at the moment that atlas is around some of these very kind of research-based approaches of systematic reviews and guidelines. But wouldn't it be exciting to have living stories in there as well? So please do share your ideas and other examples to add to that resource. I'm just seeing chat come up. Okay, thank you so much, Leah. Colleagues, thank you so much, especially to Cristian for presenting and for his hard work in driving the forum along with our team, Precious, and Fasuela as well. And thank you especially to our panelists, to Racha and Firmaye, to Fred and Josephine and Dabiela for today, and especially to our audience. It's been great having you here, and we hope we'll see you at future forums. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day further. Take care.